Hi, my name is Monica Kretschmer, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Universal Women's Network, Woman of Inspiration Awards, and this is the Woman of Inspiration podcast, where we speak with women who lead, inspire, and motivate. Today is a very special guest. It is my pleasure to welcome back Marija Pavkovic-Tovissi. She is the president and CEO of MaKami College. She is a 2025 Woman of Inspiration Awardee Legacy Award recipient. Marija is also, I say welcome back because she's also the 2017 Woman of Inspiration Awardee, and her journey since that recognition is a powerful example of what happens when vision, courage, and purpose come together. For more than 2 decades, Marija has redefined education through access, equity, and generational impact, transforming MaKami College into a nonprofit, independent academic institution and creating pathways for learners traditionally unserved by post-secondary systems. Her work proves that education doesn't just change one life, it transforms families and future generations. Marija, welcome back to the Woman of Inspiration podcast. We're honored to celebrate your legacy, your journey, and the lives that you continue to change.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
And Marija, for those listeners that are just tuning in today, if they were to turn the page back to almost a decade, I recall a certain conversation that you and I had where I asked you, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And do you remember what you told me?
I said we were going to be an independent academic institution, which was an incredible thing to say at the time because there was literally no pathway to that decision until we paved our own.
So and that is super inspiring. Like I am going to dig up that file because it's there. And I'm going to tag it to the link and so that viewers can see that because that is like manifesting to the nth degree. It's being so clear and so focused on what your end goal is. You don't know how to get there, but that's where the hell you're going. And so maybe take us back to the very beginning. Before, like, let's talk about your career path and journey because our listeners, let's bring them up to speed. And then we'll talk about what it takes to sort of bring that vision to life. So, where did you start? Where did the seed and the business idea come for MaKami?
Well, MaKami College was originally founded by my mother and I, Luba Pavkovic, and it was founded because we're from former Yugoslavia originally. And we came here and we were looking for opportunities for my parents to be re-educated. And as a child, you learn English faster than your parents do. And so you're usually translating on their behalf. They struggle. None of us spoke English when we first came to Canada. And so my mom realized pretty quickly that she was going to focus her life on education. And so she actually started working as a janitor, which is a typical job, unfortunately, most immigrants get, especially when you don't have Canadian education at the University of Alberta. And she was doing her job at the University of Alberta, and they offered some free ESL classes to their employees. And she jumped at the chance and started doing her job full time, taking care of the household as well as taking these ESL classes at night. And then they offered some academic upgrading, and she jumped on that too. And eventually, she actually became an LPN, adult educator, a holistic practitioner. She's got a master's degree in adult education. She just went on and on and on to educate herself. But where she started and where she ended up was such a huge learning curve and so much adversity. And I saw that impact. And I saw every time she graduated from something successfully, our lives would improve. We would get a little bit of a less crappy apartment. We would get a small house with a backyard. We would get piano lessons, kung fu classes. And we really saw the generational change that was brought about by the right kind of education and pathways to employment. And my dad was doing the same thing. He was in electrical engineering back home, and then he went into different trades here in Canada and started building his own business. So they were both pursuing different pathways, but my mom was really the inspiration and catalyst. And one day I just got really frustrated with how she was treated, the fact that it was very exclusive, look to your left, look to your right, half of you won't be here. And that was a repeated language and narrative back some 20 years ago. And I got frustrated and I finally said, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way to create something. And we actually launched with my mom's educational, nursing, medical, massage therapy, all the different credentials she has taken, and my business and marketing background. We got together and we launched MaKami College back in 2001.
And just like that, that's how business happens. You just use all available resources and skill sets and you jump in with both feet and get it done. You make it sound really easy, and that's not the easy part of it.
No.
You know, it was a bold vision. And, people think about starting businesses or, solving problems that are, everyday uses. Like I'm just going to say packaged goods,
Mm.
um, you know, companies that are a little bit more straightforward, a package, a market, a customer. But building something from scratch might have been, well, I know it was a lot more involved and in breaking new pathways into something that is not necessarily, it's very institutionalized. How did you
Mm.
break down some of those barriers in the earlier days when people are looking at you like, who do you think you are?
Yeah, I mean, it was very naive and lofty of a goal to go into this. I think I can credit my youth and the fact that I really didn't have a lot of life experience at that point to understand how difficult it was going to be. And I think that was my biggest asset at the time, not actually understanding the mountain that I would have to climb, the multiple mountains, and the fact that I was ill prepared and didn't have what I needed to be properly set up. It just made me think that I could do it because I didn't actually understand the hardships or the struggles that I was going to go through. So I think my youth was an advantage at the time. I think having fantastic parents that were there to support me to be a safety net if I fell. They weren't people with resources. They didn't have financial money. I didn't have a trust account. They couldn't invest in my vision, but I knew that I would have a roof over my head and food on the table if something went wrong. And so I kind of felt young and invincible. And I thought, well, I'm just going to try. What's the worst that can happen? And so I've been a big kind of advocate of youth getting involved in entrepreneurship from a very young age because I think that naivety actually helps you. You know, people think you need to be really smart and experienced and educated to be an entrepreneur. And I actually think it's the opposite. I think you need this feeling that you're not afraid of risk and you need to be invincible and what better generation to do that than our youth. And so I think for me that was a real advantage when I first started. I just didn't know what I didn't know, and I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And as a person I think of faith as well, I can look back hindsight and really connect the dots along the way, the many many dots of opportunities and doors open, and I believe I was just a good steward of jumping into those opportunities with both feet.
And so, what can you maybe talk about some of those pivotal moments that helped you bring that vision to life? Because there are some key moments. And if looking back at those, what would those be?
I would say the original key moment was just seeing my parents suffer as immigrants and newcomers to Canada and seeing how education could create generational change that was transformative to the entire family and not just for the family, but generations to come. I think another pivotal moment was in 2004 where we were able to get designated as a private vocational college back in the day and be able to kind of be legitimized and credentialed at that point under what we call the PVT, the Private Vocational Training Act. As we moved forward, we developed relationships, partnerships in business. In 2009, we created our own educational charity that was pulling sponsorships and scholarships for students. We saw that people had a need, and we figured out a way to help support them and bring donors for scholarships. In 2013, I really wanted to launch a Calgary campus. Everyone told me not to do it. It's funny how everyone says something's impossible until you achieve it, right? And they're
Mm.
like, oh, okay, you got a good thing going. Don't reach any higher. This is already a miracle in itself. Why would you risk that? And I just thought it was totally doable and totally possible. And I went forward with a Calgary campus in 2013, and that took off like a bullet. I think we probably matched what we were doing in Edmonton that took about 10 to 12 years of business in less than two. and Calgary just doubled our size in that 24-month period. And so it was the best decision possible. My lawyer and accountant actually apologized to me and got me a gift and said, "We were wrong, you were right. You should go forward with this more often." And what was interesting about Calgary is we were able to actually pilot some different hybrid versions of our program that I couldn't do in Edmonton because it was an ongoing and there couldn't be an interruption of classes. So we were actually able to do more creative things in Calgary, and then Edmonton was able to benefit from that. And then in 2023, under my leadership, we moved to the PSLA, the Post-Secondary Learning Act, as a publicly funded, well, we weren't publicly funded yet, but we became an independent academic institution and then spent 2 years in transition to become a nonprofit and now are a publicly funded institution.
Just like that.
Just like
Just like
that.
that.
Just
You
snap of
make
your
it sound
finger.
so easy, Maria. And I also do know my last visit to you actually was a little over a month ago. And I stepped foot into your building, which is used to be where my mom used to take me shopping at Sears. So
Former
you've
Sears building.
bought the Sears building in
Mhm.
Northeast Calgary and turned it into your college.
Yeah, our campus. So we started actually with a concept in Edmonton. So my brother used to tell this story when we first came to Canada. Our dad took us to the Dinosaur Museum, the Royal Trail Museum, and he saw this giant statue of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and he saw a little tiny mouse next to it. And there was an exhibition person saying there when the Tyrannosaurus Rex lived, there was nobody that hunted it. They had no predators. It was always safe. There was nothing that attacked it. It ruled the world, right? But when everything happened, the little mouse buried under the ground was able to be flexible and to adapt. And we still have a version of that mouse today. And so we live in the bones of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. We live in the Sears building in both Edmonton and in Calgary. We chose those buildings mostly out of support for our students because I'm always focused around removing barriers. So when I think about my university experience, we had to pay significant amounts of money for parking. It was very difficult to get to, wasn't always easily accessible. There was good public transportation, but there was some expenses around parking where you are. And some of the things that were cost-wise going into transportation and getting there. And so I really wanted to make sure that all our students had access to plenty, full, and free parking around our campuses, as well as public transportation. And so we had an opportunity to go through a proposal, and I can't speak to the details of it, but we were able to partner with an organization to get into the Sears building in Bonnie Doon Mall and retrofit it completely, top to bottom, 110,000 square feet into a fully functioning Edmonton campus that had amenities in the mall, that had free parking, that had great public transportation access, and lots of opportunity for growth and development. And that was such a successful proof of concept that we actually ended up doing a deal in Calgary for the same type of Sears building, this time for 137,000 square feet in Calgary as well. And my brother will always say that we live in the bones of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. If you think about what Sears was, it was a multi-billion-dollar company. Sears was Amazon before there was an Amazon. You could order a house in a Sears catalog. We would all order our school supplies, our back to school clothing. I used to even model for them in a Sears catalog in the very same building that we operate in today in Edmonton. I actually did a back to school fashion runway as a teenager, which is hilarious.
Oh
But
my gosh.
yeah, you think about it a full circle moment. They were really the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and because they weren't adapting, they weren't flexible. They could have been Amazon. They could have been bigger than Amazon. They had the infrastructure, they had everything in place to be successful in that. But I think because they were so big, they just thought we're always going to be okay. And I think, there's been a lot of changes, a lot of revolutionizing in technology and what's happening with AI and what's happening with online sales and marketplace. And it really shifted their reality, and they weren't able to adjust fast enough. And so we've taken that lesson with us wholeheartedly. And although we're in the now public side of the post-secondary industry, we still believe that flexibility, adaptation, modernization, technology, all of that needs to be included because the educational world hasn't really seen much of a revolution since the 1950s, if we're honest.
And that's the absolute truth. I mean, it's constantly evolving, but there was leaps and bounds. I mean, we're at a real pivotal time in the world right now. I mean, it's exciting. Um, It's scary for some businesses that aren't able to adapt to it or to see the vision, but it's exciting for those that can, and you are one of those people. So, Maria, we talk about the messy of entrepreneurship. Actually, we don't talk about the messy of entrepreneurship. What am I saying? We actually just do the highlight reel. Most of the time, we celebrate the successes, we celebrate the milestones, if we're lucky enough to stop long enough to do that. But what we don't talk about enough is the messy uncomfortableness. I mean, when I hear people saying, you got to just get in, you got to start your business. I always say, hang tight, because I think that we need to talk a little bit more about what it takes to start a business, the risk, the mindset, all of those things that are not talked about nearly enough. So maybe you can share a little bit about the messy middle and your experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a great amount of times where I have been uncertain, where I've been stressed, where I've been exhausted. And I think that I just never gave up on the vision of what I was trying to achieve. I pursued it relentlessly. Now, that doesn't mean that I wasn't smart about it. You know, I've been always really focused on a lean approach to business. I'm not going to go and borrow $10 million from the bank, which I can't pay back and put my family and my home in jeopardy. I have always focused on a very lean and creative approach, but I will pursue my vision wholeheartedly. And if anything comes up and stands in my way, I just refuse. I want to go over it, around it, under it, however I can find to build a bridge, not a dam, to go through that challenge because in my mind, I am racing towards the finish line and that's where I want to be. And so there's absolutely a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of challenges being a female in leadership. There's a lot of times where in meetings I'm not taken as seriously as my male counterparts. I'm also a mother and a wife. While we're doing this podcast right now, I've got dinner on the stove and I've got a kid in skating classes that my husband had to go drop off today because I wasn't going to be able to. And sometimes it's about trying to juggle some of those responsibilities that can be a challenge as well. I think financing is always a crutch for any entrepreneur that's trying to figure out how they're going to do this, how they're going to fund this. And you have to figure out creative ways, and partnerships is a big part of this, being able to find individuals who can believe in your dream, even if they don't believe in it the same way you do. There's aspects where they can help you, finding great mentors that can help maybe speed up some of those learning curves along the way can really save you some time, resources, energy, and money. And yeah, there's been challenges. At one point in Edmonton, we actually had to close down our campus for 6 months because our landlord decided to do something different from the building. And I remember my mom actually saying to me, "We had a good run. You know, this is a good run. We made it. We achieved it. We did what we set out to do. It's time to move on and get a real job." And I was like, "No, no, it's not." And I wasn't gonna let her limited mindset in that moment limit me and what was possible for my life. And so I really understood at that moment it was time for the next generation to step up and lead. At that point, we were equal partners, but she was my mom and she was, you know, educated and she was teaching and I was handling the business part, but she was really the front-facing part of the college in front of the students. And I realized it was a calling now for me to step up and take on that leadership role and that she had taken it as far as she could take it, and it was my job to go to that next generational legacy building level. And you know, that was a pivotal moment for me to realize that just because you think everything is done with, or something has happened that's so dramatic, that's really just crushed your dreams and where your purpose is in that moment, it doesn't mean that it's the end. It means you need to stop, reset, take a breath, pivot, rethink the situation, be creative, and pursue it even harder.
Well, I know that, being a fellow entrepreneur, you get into, logging the years, 1 year, 2 year, you get 5 years, you're working at it for a decade. That becomes so much a part of who you are. Whether everybody likes to say, it's not who you are, but it actually is so much part of your DNA because you put everything into it. So, and when you truly believe in something, I believe there's nothing that is not possible.
I agree.
But it
Yeah.
does take a mindset and a very strong mindset.
Hmm.
Um, to come up against some people that are, I mean, family members are one thing, and then you have the naysayers that don't have a clue of what you're capable of. So let's talk about being undermined.
I think for me, it's almost like a challenge being thrown down. I think some people crumble when they are met with resistance. And I think through my life and being an immigrant and a newcomer and coming through this life experience as a child, I think it's made me highly resilient. And I think I had a really great father who made my confidence soar as a young person. He was always very much on Team Maria. He was very supportive of me. He encouraged me with my grades, with my activities. He told me anything. We came to Canada and anything is possible in Canada. He used to repeat that phrase every single day to the point that he just made me believe it from a very young age. And I think that I have to credit him for that because I think so many people have a different lived experience than I did in regards to that. And so I think when other people come and tell me it's not possible, I'm like, oh yeah, well, my daddy says it is. So you know what? I'm just gonna go for it and see what happens. And I see it as a personal challenge to prove them wrong. And sometimes that can even be the fuel to the fire that I need, to get off my butt and start moving on something that maybe I had hit a brick wall in before.
I love it. Um, my dad told me, and it's true. And you're right. I mean, I talk to so many women, and sometimes they don't have the support network or the role models. And I think from those seeds being planted at such a young age, that it is possible. You just have to find a solution. So there's a solution for absolutely everything. So it might not be right now or this way, but it can be done.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's about building the bridge. If you can't figure out a way around, either you have to build the bridge or you have to find somebody who can help you build a bridge over that challenge because you will get past it. There is always a way, a workaround, something that you can do in order to move yourself forward. Sometimes you are crawling at a snail's pace and other times you're running. And so you just have to figure out your own pace, your own path and understand that it'll happen over time and you can't compare yourself to other people's journey. We're all doing something very, very different. And I think social media sometimes does a bad job of that. You talked about that idea of a highlight reel. Everyone's posting
Mhm.
all the positive things, none of the negative things. So it can become very easy to get discouraged when you're seeing other people doing great things or going on this trip or having a wonderful time at work. But I think it's important to stay true and authentic to your own journey.
And so I know that, I mean, our audience base is primarily women, but we do have men as well. And using your voice is such an important element. And the whole awards process and having women step into that spotlight and positions of power is incredibly important. But when you have something that you need to say. I mean, you're a poster child for speaking up for your values, speaking up for what you believe in. Um, what does that look like? How can we encourage more women to use their voice? And what advice do you have for them?
I think silence sometimes feels safer, but it rarely leads to change. And I think my advice to women in leadership is in the spaces that you're in, your voice doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be combative or confrontational, but it needs to be effective. You need to be intentional in the ways that you show up and speak out, and you need to speak from experience, not apology. I think people can trigger you if you have a trigger. So if you don't feel confident in yourself, if you're feeling insecure and inadequate, and you're trying to find a space for yourself at the table, people are able to trigger and push those buttons and make you feel even worse. I think you have to take a look internally to see how you feel about your position, how you feel about what you've accomplished thus far. Be honest, be truthful, be authentic. Understand that you still have a long way to go, but you need to stand in your own intention and with your own purpose, and you need to speak up on behalf of others who don't yet have a voice.
Beautifully said, because there that silence is really limiting your abilities to make an impact.
Yeah, and I've seen, sometimes when women speak up, they can be labeled, right? They can be labeled as aggressive or confrontational or the B word just because they're speaking their own mind, where we wouldn't look twice at a man that was being that way in a boardroom or a meeting, or we would find them confident. And I think you are dealing with a little bit of that stereotype and some cultural significance that we have to address. And I think it's just important for us to not have a trigger that somebody can push, not a button. I think you have to stand in your own experience and your own intention and be strong in your beliefs. And you don't have to be loud, but you have to be effective. That's my best advice that I can give people. And it doesn't matter what other people think or say. It only matters on how you feel about your ability and desire to be there.
So I want to ask you in the, 2 decades that you have been building your business, what have you seen? Have you seen changes made in a positive, or what sort of changes have you seen made for women carving their path in leadership?
I'm seeing a lot more intentional participation, both from women, understanding that they do deserve to have a seat at the table. I'm seeing a lot more support in this allyship where male entrepreneurs, business owners, C-suite are recognizing that women have great voices on boards and in leadership positions and add value in that. There's a perfect example of that with what happened with Hockey Canada, where their entire board quit. Their CEO was fired with the scandal that they had to face. And in their response to that, when they were looking at new board members, they really went and diversified that board. And not diversity for the sake of diversity, not for the sake of woke kind of mindsets. It was more about who can actually bring experience and a depth of knowledge with a different perspective and a different point of view. And because of that, they were able to turn an incredible crisis around very, very quickly. And we're starting to see more of that. We're starting to see more women being requested to be in leadership, more women being requested to be on boards. And for me, I always like it when we have a diverse group of voices around the table. And whether that's visible, diversity, or whether that's a mix of men and women or immigrants, newcomers, people with different cultural backgrounds, I just find we all have such a very lived experience that's so different from each other, but yet we have so many things in common that unify us. And so being able to hear different perspectives really gets you out of these kind of blinder pathways that you're on, and it opens your mind and it opens your creativity and it opens the way that you think about the world. And I think that can bring value to any business. So I've seen a bit of a shift in that for sure. There's definitely been more of a movement. I think we still got a bit of a ways to go.
Well, I see progress. And I think, for 2026, I think I shared that I believe that we're entering into the power era, a really different way mindset, as far as just talking about how we look at leadership. Instead of looking at women carving that path and doing it all alone, it's like I now see how women are making room at the table for men to be in that room that was not open to men for so many years. Um, and I lead a women's network. So I've always wanted to make space for men to join in because I value what they can bring to the table. But I think that power era, I think we're going to see in the next decade is where men that are allies are really visibly going to step up because now there is an opportunity where they're seen, they're heard, and they're valued because as odd as it is, there just wasn't that space available for them. Maybe behind closed doors, but not forward facing publicly. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's true. I think it's hard to say because I think in North America and what we consider kind of like first world countries and stuff, it's very different. I think we had a very extreme correction, right? Women felt, I think, that they had a really long ladder to climb and lots of challenges, and so there was this overcorrection of she bosses and lady bosses and all sorts of stuff that went really to an extreme in some cases, and we're trying to exclude men from those conversations. And that's no better than men excluding women. I think the power in leadership is when you have the diverse voices coming together with their own strengths and relationships. Most of the mentors that I had growing up when I was first an entrepreneur, outside of my mom, was really male entrepreneurs because I didn't have a lot of female entrepreneurs at the time in my life that I could reach out to for support. And men lead very differently than women. I think what I've noticed with men is they are less attached to the business as this is my blood, sweat, and tears. They're a little bit more logical in the way that they process business decisions, where I think women do find a little bit of identity if it's a business that they've built from scratch and they treat it almost like a child that they've, put all this investment into. And I think both of those things can have an advantage, but both of those things can also have a disadvantage. And I think when you merge those two things together is a much better kind of well-rounded approach to how you operate in business. I think women can be capitalists with a heart. I think men tend to be a little bit more detached in some of that decision making from emotions, and that can help them actually drive their business a bit further, a little bit quicker. And so I think being able to leverage each other's strengths and offset each other's weaknesses is the best way to go. I do think we have a much further way to go when it comes to women in leaderships internationally. And there's a lot of countries where girls can't even go to school. And so now we're talking about a real lack of opportunity. So I'm always very grateful and very aware of the privilege and the opportunity I have here in Canada compared to if I had been born in a lottery in the world.
Mm. Well said. And I would agree with you that there is more room for improvement. I want to talk a little bit more about that support her piece because as a female entrepreneur, we don't do it alone. We talked about this in the green room, and you said, like I'm a wife and I'm a mother. I'm also a business owner. So let's talk about your support hers and that have been a part of your journey and how important it is to have that support network.
Well, like I said, I've had some really great male mentors in leadership as well as family members that have really supported me along the way. I think it started with my father saying, we're going to come to Canada because anything is possible here, and I've got you, and you can jump really high, and I'll catch you. You won't fail, you won't fall. And I think that started all. I have a fantastic business partner and brother, Vladimir, who is an amazing, I think, support her ally. His entire leadership team is all female when I think about it, and that's rare for a male leader. And he didn't do it intentionally. He really hired the best person for each of those jobs. But he really has a strong female leadership team, and he's always been an ally of them and us. I've seen him step up in meetings where he saw that I was being disrespected, but I was in my I'm being nice and Canadian and polite mode, where he saw the disrespect and stepped up and addressed it, where I hadn't even consciously came aware of it in the moment. I was kind of like, oh, this guy's a jerk. I'm just going to address it politically correctly. I'm going to manage the situation as a professional. I'm not going to get offended. And he actually engaged and stepped in and said, this is unacceptable. And you're going to take that back and you're going to apologize. And you're not going to speak to the president of our company in that manner. And he shut it down immediately. And for him, I'm incredibly grateful because he does that all the time. He just, he's a joker and he makes all sorts of jokes and all sorts of fun stuff. But when it comes to that type of thing, he will not allow one of our female leaders to be disrespected. And I really appreciate that about him. My husband of 16, 17 years, Jolt, is amazing. He is an engineer by trade and has been incredibly supportive. And he's a very strong male leader in his own right. But you know what? He doesn't get triggered by the fact that he's working with somebody who's also a powerhouse. He sees this as a great partnership and a great opportunity to work together. And he really goes full forward in our life in supporting myself and my daughter. He understands that there's times where I'm going to be his wife and the mother of our child. And then there's other times where I have to have my president's hat on and I have to mean business and I have to be in boardrooms or flying to London. And he takes care of business at home. Like he's been fantastic. And I wish all females had a supportive group of men in their life that were a family that were doing such a great job. When I think about our company, we have some fantastic male leaders in our organization. Our CFO, Ryan, is incredible. He's been a real ally and partner. There are times where I will send him to a meeting because I know he'll be better received. And he does a great job and he's a great supporter of our female leaders as well. We've got lawyers, accountants, bankers that have really just fallen in love with our vision and have decided to pursue it, that have given us opportunities and advancements in pathways that I couldn't have possibly ever achieved on our own. I think when you celebrate women's achievements with allyship, I think what that looks like is leadership including everyone, recognition
Mm.
that kind of reinforces representation. It's not just about being performative, it's about being impactful and being consistent and showing up. And I could just go on and on and on and list those mentors that have been allies in my life. And I don't think we'd have enough time today in the podcast to name them all. It really has been a fantastic journey. But I think a part of that is also my ability to be vulnerable and open with the challenges that we're facing. I think sometimes both men and women struggle when they're trying so hard to show that everything's okay in this perfect Facebook reel, and they're not willing to share that they're struggling. One of the biggest lessons I learned early on is to ask people for help, to ask people for advice, there's a lot of people that are willing to help you free of charge if you just ask for their opinion. And so I think a big part of, I think, my leadership style is to say, hey, we're having a challenge in this. What advice could you share with us? What experiences have you been through that would relate to this? Is there any networking or contacts that you can give me to help us overcome this challenge? And I have no shame in sharing that there's a problem and we need help and support.
Beautiful. I think that's probably one of the hardest things for women to do is they ask for help because it might show a break in the foundation, but actually it's a strength.
Hmm.
Beautiful. So you touched on celebrating women. Of course, you know that is my world.
I know you're
Celebrating the
amazing at
achievements
it.
of women. Yes, we can't see enough. Um, so why, Maria? I mean, you've been now 2017, 2025, you know, the first time around, you remember those emotions going through your head that first time being
Mhm.
recognized.
It's always a shock to me sometimes when we get these recognitions because we're so busy, in our own little world doing our own little thing. And sometimes we forget how important it is to recognize leaders. And I think recognition reinforces representation, and representation influences systems. And when we acknowledge women's impact, we normalize it. It doesn't become, oh, Maria's special, it makes it normal. Anyone can do this. Anyone can achieve their visions and their goals and their dreams. Anyone can be supported. Anyone can be recognized for the things that they're doing. It allows, I have a teenage daughter, allows young girls to look up to this and say, well, if they can do it, why can't I? It allows for more female mentors and female stories to be told, which I think I didn't have any of that growing up. I had very few female mentors. I mentioned this sadly a few times, but I would have loved to have more female strong leadership to look up to at the time. And I was very lucky that at least I had leadership and mentorship. But, I think it's my responsibility in my generation to normalize it and to be a good influence and a mentor to somebody else who is on their own journey. And so I think it's important that we reinforce it and we celebrate it as normal.
Beautiful. And so now into 2025, and we've now made such a great big impact. What is next, Maria? What do you have on the go? Are you going to go for that vineyard? We talked about a vineyard last time.
I'm putting it
Are you
out
going
there,
to
right?
just are you just going to go and pivot and do the vineyard or
No, no, I think that I have a full-time job right now with MaKami College as president and CEO. I am enjoying it. I love what I do. I love our students. I love our people who do great things every day and who impact our community for the positive. I think what's next right now for us is refinement of our processes and procedures as we've stepped into this new public era. I think for us, it's expanding our programs, expanding our campuses to different cities and town, kind of strengthening MaKami's impact while staying aligned to our purpose of why we help people in the first place. I think our greatest opportunity ahead is kind of creating pathways that support not just access to education, but long-term leadership, contribution, community impact. And I think for me, it really is legacy building at this point. I think I've achieved a lot of the things I set out to achieve at a young age. And I'm not going to stop here. I'm going to set new goals and new dreams and new visions. But I think it is really amazing to see the impact that's growing in the community. MaKami is known in the post-secondary sector as the care bears of post-secondary education because we care about our staff, we care about our students, we care about our graduates, we care about the employers that are taking care of our students, and we just care and we put services around, wraparound services that also care and make sure that we're removing barriers to success. And I think that our community could use more of that. I think there could be more impact in the community as MaKami grows in program size and campuses. And I think we're resetting the stage for what post-secondary education can look like. And I think we're in this area where we're trying to be partners in post-secondary. We've gotten further along in our relationships with other public post-secondary institutions and sharing things like transfer credits, potentially shared spaces, opportunities for advancing their skilled workforce in Alberta, upskilling, micro-credentialing, different ways in which we can retrain people for the AI tsunami wave that's coming at our province. That's going to leave a lot of people in a lot of trouble depending on what industry they're in. And so for me, what's next is really just reimagining what post-secondary could look like, getting buy-in, engagement, and partners from the other public post-secondary institutions to understand that we have to work together, that none of us can be an island, that we have to share resources, people, time, research, spaces to help Albertans in the ever-changing landscape. That is what's happening here. When I retire, though, I might consider starting my own vineyard because that's always been a passion of mine. So I'm still going to put it out there. You never know, but I think I've
So
got my
that might be the
right
what,
now.
20-year vision?
Maybe
It
a
looks
10
like you have enough work
10 to
ahead of you,
15 year
Maria.
vision. Yeah, 10 to 15 year vision. The next 5 to 10 years is a lot of growth, alignment, and refinement for MaKami College.
Beautiful. Well, I look forward to another conversation that 5 to 10 years and go, how
Mhm.
is that going?
Maybe
It
we'll
just
be having
seems,
it from my vineyard.
well, it will be in the vineyard, hopefully the
We'll be in
next
the
time.
vineyard, of course.
So, Maria, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy having you on the Woman of Inspiration podcast again. And of course, I always leave with your definition of a woman of inspiration. So, what is that to you, Maria?
I think somebody who is authentic in their leadership that takes care of their community, their people, their clients. I think somebody who has achieved some level of success, not necessarily for them, but for the greaterment of humanity. And I think it's just a person who is somebody you want to look up to because they're making an impact and creating a legacy that's bettering other individuals' lives in our community.
Beautiful. And I always ask because we've just launched our Monica's bookshelf. Of course, I think there's a lots of books that we can learn and grow from. So any book that you're reading right now that you want to share,
That's so
listeners can
that's
make a
so
note of that.
funny. Yeah, can you see this one here?
Uh, it's called Barely
It's called
Boundaries.
Boundaries for Leaders, Results, Relationships, and Being Ridiculously in Charge by Dr. Henry Cloud.
Oh, I see that. Okay, so boundaries for leaders, being ridiculously in charge. I love it.
Yeah, and I'm actually making some of our senior leadership, male and women, read this book together. We're doing a bit of a book study because I think it's a fantastic book, and I've just been. It's funny that I was not prepared to answer that question, but I was just reading it before we went on to the podcast for some notes to share with our team, and so yeah, it's been a wonderful book, and I'm finding a lot of really insightful topics in here that I love.
Beautiful. And a daily non-negotiable so that Maria stays her absolute best and prepares herself for success every day.
Oh, coffee, 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 and more coffee. I would not survive without coffee and some good music, I think, too.
Great. Well, Maria, it has been a pleasure. Any last words for our audience? How can they get a hold of you, learn more about MaKami College and the programs that you offer?
Well, we have our website, MaKami College, MaKami College.com, where it has all sorts of information on how to get in touch with us, the programs that we're offering, the programs we're expanding to, lots of interesting events and activities and community engagement that we're up to. So, yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Beautiful. So, Maria, thank you so much for the joining us on the Woman of Inspiration podcast. Congratulations again on your Woman of Inspiration Legacy Award. And, your true leadership is not measured by titles. You're an obvious example of that. But you live by change, and it's generations that are being impacted and empowered by the work that you're doing. So, so honored to have you on this journey with us and listeners. If you were inspired, please share. I think this is worth a share to your team, to your networks. Hit the subscribe button, and I look forward to celebrating with you again very soon, hopefully in that wine vineyard. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you so much for your time.